Hi, welcome to this episode of The Pulse. I'm joined today by Libby, Lyons. This is Regen Strategic's policy and political podcast. We're really happy to be speaking on matters relating to the state budget as we intended, as we advertised to our clients and our network. But events over the weekend have obviously overshadowed everything domestically and certainly more locally. We have the US premeditating some attacks on Iranian sites, nuclear sites. That's been met with retaliation, Iranian missiles into Israel, into US bases that are in Qatar, and obviously that's ratcheted up the risk ratings that I'm sure John Greenaway would have spoken about a few weeks ago when we met with him, with regard to, I guess, the so what and the consequences from those military actions. Quite a world we're living in.
It sure is, but I see that this morning the US president has announced that the 12-day war is over, so there is a ceasefire. And I genuinely hope that is the case. I think we all do. I think there's, the Middle East seems to be a bit of a tinderbox at the moment. So I hope that is the case, and I hope that ceasefire lasts. I think we don't need any more upheaval in the Middle East at the moment. So if that ceasefire can hold, I think it's and it may bode well for other skirmishes that skirmish is the wrong word, but Israel.
Other armed conflicts.
Yeah, exactly.
Mike Pizzullo, the former head of Home Affairs, was on 7:30 Report tonight. Now, I realise with these sort of things, they're going to quickly become out of date, and a new set of circumstances probably overshadows that increasingly quickly. But he did flag the I guess, increased likelihood of terror-related incidents as a result of, I guess he was suggesting Iranian sleeper cells that might be positioned within Western nations, including Australia, and there's been some evidence of that in the past. But it must be very difficult for a friend like John, or certainly those in more formal roles within security apparatus of Western democracies, to continually monitor this in real time, be agile enough to deal with the consequences of a very, very complex chessboard.
Look, I think you're absolutely right, and I think terrorist attacks as a result of all of this are, I think quite likely, sadly. I think we're very blessed with the role that we play within the Five Eyes. I think that from an intelligence perspective, the Five Eyes works extraordinarily well, and I think the intelligence that's gathered is second to none in that. And I hope that, and I think that they're onto things. And whilst Mike Pizzullo is out of that whole scenario now, I think he probably has got his finger on the pulse in other ways. So, I was quite impressed by his, what he had to say last night on the 7:30 Report. And I think that with the intelligence that we gather, we have a good chance of cutting most of these things off at the pass. However, as we've seen, particularly in London and other places, but particularly in London, that seems to be a focus for them. Anything can happen, and we are not immune to that, and we have to be very aware of that. And I think you look at some of the footage and some of the stories of the folk in Israel as they were living in their secure rooms that they've built in their homes and things like that. And I look at us here and I think, in many ways we have a charmed life, but we do so because we've always had strong intelligence, over the last 4 decades or so. Our intelligence capability has been strengthened by successive governments, and I think that we need to maintain that because it's really very important, because it's those services that keep us safe and a lot safer than other places, and we need to be so thankful for that. But you know, we're not immune to any of this, and we have to keep ever alert, I think.
Yeah. So I've got the front page of the West Australian in front of me, but I also have a little budget booklet that we're going to be honing in on, and we still can. We can stick to our knitting. I mean, there's probably a strong relationship between the two in regard to trade and economic volatility that may be caused by global conflict and how that's potentially disruptive or likely to be disruptive, certainly more difficult to forecast and model, and the impacts that are going to be brought to bear on the WA economy. The long caretaker mode that sort of set in across the WA government, the WA public sector, that was, I guess, something that was likely to happen, given that we have a fixed fixed 4-year cycle leading up to a March election. You sort of have the whole of the summer to have a think about the election that's going to be forthcoming. Those brakes that were put on sort of the more active decision making seem to be activated well in advance of the formal caretaker period. And then, as flagged by Premier Cook, Rita Saffioti as Treasurer, there was always an intention, were Labor to be re-elected, that they'd bring in a budget pretty quickly. They'd get to work straight away. And that seems to be what has been handed down last week. Within around 100 days of being re-elected, they now have a budget that, I guess, sets out a path for the focus on infrastructure and taking the state into the 2030s. But in the short term, there probably are some issues to be navigated. We might see a little bit of that in Parliament this week. Well, I think we'll see a lot of that in Parliament this week around the impacts on households that are still dealing with, if not an increasingly inflationary environment, certainly a high cost of living, and a sense that the winding back of those electricity credits and some of the softening impacts of the budget on household budgets are slowly being taken away. That's going to have an immediate cash flow impact on the suburbs around Western Australia.
Absolutely. I got up and hung the washing on the line today knowing it wasn't going to rain rather than put it in the dryer because I was thinking about my electricity bill. So it does. It affects everybody. But you can't keep propping households up forever, I guess, too. So from that perspective, I understand why they have done that. But I think, we've said this before, people are really hurting. And when you get, there'll be many people, I think, that got up and put the washing on the line today instead of throwing it into the dryer because it was going to be a fine day. Because you're thinking like that at the moment because the electricity bills come in and they're massive. They're double, triple what they were 5 or 10 years ago. And we all have to find a way to pay that. So I think people are hurting, but I do understand why they focused on infrastructure. We must prepare for the next decade or two. We've got an ever-increasing population. We have to keep up with the infrastructure needs of an ever-increasing population. My concern with it all is, as I'm sure is the concern of many, is where do we find the people to do the work, and are the supply, are we guaranteed supply of materials? Because they seem to be the things that are holding things up and also increasing the price, the cost of so many of the infrastructure projects at the moment. So I get it, but it's it's a tough balancing act for the government to be able to balance this. But I think, I don't know, what's your view? I'm very concerned about finding the folk to do it, finding the people to do the work, and ensuring the security of supply of materials.
Yeah, look, I mean, we're a business that assists clients work their way through those phases. There's a number that are, not just our clients, but organisations across Western Australia that are in that valley of death. It sounds dramatic, but they are walking through that tenuous stage of their commercialisation, where there's a path they can see where they want to get to in say 5 to 10 years. But this immediate 1 or 2 in that inflationary environment, with challenges on supply chain, with an already constrained access to skilled workers, that they are going to need support from government to just obtain that tipping point that pushes them into a path where they're profitable, or at least a path towards profitability, to capitalise on a renewable energy project, an innovation, a new business venture that might be, augmenting what they already do. So again, there's requests on the budget and asks on the government to be able to assist that. That changes the debt profile of the state. So yeah, we I think get a sense that we're in a good spot relative to other jurisdictions around Australia, and certainly around the world. But it comes with challenges, because I think there is a heightened degree of expectation from households and businesses around WA that we are in a good position, surplus budget, relatively low levels of net debt in terms of the ability to service that debt. But again, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, if you've got that capacity within the budget, are we putting it to best use?
And I think if you listen to the outgoing president of the West Australian AMA, he would say we're not.
Yeah.
I think if you speak to anybody who's had to visit an ED in the last 12 months or so, they'd probably say they're not. And I do note that there's money in there for the
the
women and
expansion.
babies. But his complaint was the money's going into planning and not actually upgrading the services that are in desperate need now, particularly at Sir Charles Gardner Hospital in Royal Perth. So it's a very look. I wouldn't be Premier for quids. I think it's and neither would I want to be Treasurer. I think it's a really tricky time at the moment, because I think our economy is in the state is looking okay, but there is these other geopolitical forces that are in play affect our economy as well. I think it's a really difficult period that we're going through. I don't think it's going to get any easier over the next 12 to 24 months. And so what do you do? What do you prioritise? And they've decided to prioritise infrastructure. They've decided to continue with a couple of the follies that I know that there's been a lot of...
Follies?
Well, the rugby and the racetrack,
yes,
the two R's.
Yeah.
I think, I'll call them follies, because I think there's been... and I understand why they want to do that, because it will attract tourism and it will attract that tourist dollar, and that's really, really important. But when you sit in, as I did a couple of months ago, and you sit in the ED of Sir Charles Gardner Hospital, it's a pretty drab place. The facilities are appalling. The wait times are unacceptable, I think, for most people. And you've got to wonder what we're doing to help that.
Yeah, so it's an issue of priority. Yeah, and I think the racetrack, the the Perth Bears, the NRL team that have been, let's say, accelerated in terms of where everyone thought they were going to wind up within the budget. There clearly needs to be some very, very thorough community consultation and an ability to demonstrate how that community consultation is informing the final outcome. If there's a sniff of it being premeditated or a bit of a ruse, successive governments have had those issues. Colin Barnett had a variety of projects that followed him around as a
Elizabeth Key.
Yeah, and look, whether or not they're justified, that's for more a broader collective than you and I to determine.
Absolutely. Richard
Court had the bell tower. There are those taglines that follow presidents, premiers, and notable leaders within our state that are either a very fond memory or they can become a bit of a vanity project. So, as I said, the race to a budget soon after the election, I think, didn't provide a great deal of scope to frame the rationale for some of those priorities. But that's going to be left to the remaining 3 and a bit years of the term.
Yeah, it will. Look, I think it'll be interesting. As I say, I wouldn't want to be Premier or Treasurer for Quids at the moment. I think they're tough times. We're in tough times, and I think it'll be. We've got to watch the commodities very closely. As you know, in Western Australia, we go boom or bust. We're riding on the crest of a wave at the moment, but for how much longer? It's tricky. I wouldn't want to be putting a state budget together, and I think they've done a great job. You're always going to get your detractors, but I think we do have to focus, as I said before, our population's increasing. We have to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to accommodate a larger population, but I think we will ignore health at our peril. And I'm not saying they're ignoring health.
No.
But I think...
No, there's 4 ministers focused on it.
Absolutely. But are we... Well, and that might be a problem. That might be a problem. In an operational sense, that might actually be a problem. And so let's wait and see what happens with that. But I think that you can't... If we're talking infrastructure, we've got to also look at existing health infrastructure. And I think for those working in those hospitals that are stretched to physical capacity in terms of the space that they're working in, that adds extra duress and pressure and stress to those working within it. And that's not even thinking about the patients that are going through. So it's hard. It's hard to know, what to prioritise and how to prioritise. But I think we can't ignore those things. We really can't.
Third-term government, they can't point, and nor would they necessarily want to. There's no release around pointing to a prior decision of government. 10 years in the job, that's right. It's only your colleagues that you're looking at, past and present. The new public sector, there's some appointments to public sector leadership roles that, they indicate WA is a very attractive place because we've got some incomers, predominantly from Queensland. Yeah, the other resources state.
Yeah.
So clearly
minor resources state.
Yeah.
By comparison,
different product mix.
We'll get into trouble from all the.
I know.
Banana benders out there.
No, that's fine. But they'll all individually have a role again around enacting the policies that are prioritised by the government, providing as much frank and fearless advice as possible in this modern age. But But they too would be scratching their heads. I'm sure they're doing more than scratching their heads around finding that talent to attract and be retained within the public sector, because there's no shortage of opportunities for someone that's looking to progress their career in WA.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'd be a bit peeved actually if I was the Premier of Queensland to lose I think it was three. Was it three of their senior people?
Certainly two, yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of men there, I noticed.
Yeah.
I hate to point it out, but there were more men than women, and as long as it was done on merit and they were the best people for the job, then that's fabulous. But I think that we'll wait and see. I think it's good to bring different people in from different states. I don't think that hurts at all. But I think the lack of West Australians was notable to me. I was just surprised that there weren't more West Australians in that group, because I think we've got some great talent here and some really good people. And again, as I say, it's great to bring in a diversity of thought from and experience from other states. But yeah, I wonder whether West Australian folk didn't apply. Don't know.
Possibly. And of course, we don't want to lose our top talent. We don't want to lose our
absolutely.
chief mandarins out of the WA public sector to any other state.
No, we don't. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So, Libby, you were recently at the Chief Executive Women Gala event a couple of weeks ago. What is the general sentiment that was remarked upon at that event around the progress of women within the workforce in leadership positions, a more modernised and contemporary consideration of women within modern organisations?
Look, I'll make an observation, and the reason that I said that there were more men that were employed recently as the head honchos in the various departments, decisions like that actually will affect the public services gender pay gap. It just from the fact that there are more men than women doing
well, you
those
would know
jobs.
that the data very well.
So I think the general, chief executive women are great advocates for women in leadership and in senior roles and whatever. And I think that the general consensus is that, and you only have to look at the data, is that things are moving far too slowly. Really, things aren't happening quickly enough. I think that there are lots of organisations out there now that, because times are tough, they will cut the programs, the low-hanging fruit, and they see the programs around, gender equality, diversity and inclusion as the low-hanging fruit, and they're the ones that get cut. And which is dumb. It's really dumb, because we know from the data tells us that if you have a workforce, but particularly, a leadership where you have, diversity, where you have women and men in, by and large equal numbers, you will have a more successful business. It will be more profitable. It will be more productive, and you will get better performance. The 3 Ps. So it's very short-sighted of organisations, I believe, and not in the company's best interest to cut those sorts of programs when times are tough. I think the other thing that we've got to watch here too is that these programs that are put in place to get more women into the workforce, or to get a more inclusive workforce, are decisions that are made by a business, and they have to be treated as with any other business decision. and that is you've got to put budget behind it in order to achieve it. And you've got to get buy-in from everyone. You've got to get buy-in. It's got to come from the top down. And, you know, I will point to two of our big mining companies here who I think have done it really quite well. They haven't necessarily had the degree of success that they would like, but they've been doing it very well and they're consistent and they hang in there, and that is BHP and Rio Tinto. You know, they've put their money where their mouth is in terms of increasing the number of women, particularly in workshops and on site and whatever, and they've you know, as I say, they've got the programs in place. They're getting their people on board, and they're putting their money, you know, the money that's required to get these programs off the ground and to make them successful. They've been doing it now for some years. They don't necessarily get the accolades that they should, but they've been doing it for years, and they are being and they are seeing success. And so, you know, if ever there was, and they're very successful as organisations, you know. So I think that, you know, from a chief executive women perspective, that's what we want to see, that these things continue, that they're seen as real business issues, that there are dollars put behind them so that the programs and the people running these programs can actually see them work. And the return to the bottom line will come.
And is that the scope of CEW that would take in the public sector as well, or at least you'd have an audience that consists of figures within the public sector? Are there the same exemplars that are standing out in certain parts, or is there a noticeable distinction between the public and private sector with regard to?
Well, no, there is a distinction, and and again, it comes back to the Workplace Gender Equality Agency's data.
Yeah.
So they recently published the figures for the public service, Commonwealth public service. Yeah. So, because under the Act, under the Workplace Gender Equality Act, you can't mandate that the states report into you. But I know the agency are working with the states on voluntary reporting in. So for the first time ever, and it was something that I worked on for a long time, was to get the public service, the Commonwealth public service, to report in, and they have a very small gender pay gap. It's about 4.6%, I think, and it's because for a long time the Commonwealth have done a very good job at attracting women and getting more women into senior roles. I think when you break it down department by department, there are some departments that have bigger gender pay gaps than others, because there are some departments that have a greater percentage of men in their senior roles, and there are others that you'll find that have more women in senior roles. So, but overall, I think from memory off the top of my head, overall gender pay gap for the public service is Commonwealth public service, about 4.6%. So it's doing a lot better.
And is it narrowing over
it has
time?
From knowing the data as I did with the Commonwealth, because I used to get the figures separately, it is narrowing, yes, because they've been working hard at it. And as I say, you see far more women in senior roles, certainly in the Commonwealth public service, than you do in many private enterprise organisations.
Yeah, yeah. Bringing it back to Western Australia, there'll be, I think, some ferocious parliamentary debate as the detail of the state budget settles. Sandra Brewer has a pretty big job ahead of her as Treasury spokesperson, Shadow Treasurer in the WA Parliament. How are you seeing that next wave of Liberal leaders sort of taking their spots and getting comfortable with what their briefs are going to be for the coming term?
Well, I've just been pleased to see the shadow spokespeople hit the media, and we've seen more of that in the last couple of months than we've seen in the last 4 years, purely because there are more members, so the load has been spread, and there's more experience and skill within the party itself. So I think it's been great, and I think it's great for our democracy that our shadow spokespeople are out there now, shadow ministers are out there now, and are able to tackle and take on the issues that are important to West Australians. So, I think it's great. And, I'll be really interested to see what happens in the House this week. And, I've said before, I think Sandra Brewer will be a force to be reckoned with. So let's watch this space.
Yeah. Look, the parliamentary question time, some of the more theatrical elements that allow the opposition to make an issue into the issue of the day. They've been pretty actively used. There's a bit more colour and light, as you said, greater bandwidth, greater members, greater resources, and probably a greater amount of time collectively to do all the things that you need to be doing as an opposition. We've noted an increase in the questions on notice and all of those building blocks. And I'm sure the committees in the background are working pretty ferociously on extracting that type of information that's necessary for policy development, both for the government and the opposition.
I just hope that I really hope that we keep things within question time respectful, and that we don't get personal, because I think that that always brings down the tone. We want to see robust debate, and we want to see, accountability. But let's make sure, and unfortunately this happens in parliaments all over the world, but unfortunately we often see the respect that is expected in the private sector is not necessarily upheld on the floor of the chamber. And so let's, I just think we've got to keep talking about that to make sure
it's an unusual space, isn't it? Because it's a real outlier.
Yeah.
It's a mandated stand-up Barney that two sides of the chamber have, and it would be very difficult to even enter that with all the parliamentary experience you may have from successive terms in there, to not let it spill over into something that's a bit personal or something that's beyond the debate on policy.
But it shouldn't be. And, if we look at the Prime Minister's question time in the UK, it's always quite respectful. They don't get personal. And so I think that...
It feels a bit more rapid fire over there. Yeah.
And I think it's probably a little more... well, I'm not sure. But it is more rapid fire, and I quite like it, because I think that, you don't get people waffling on and carrying on, but, they address the question in point. But I just think that we need to ensure that all our elected members, whether it be, and, let's not start on local government, for goodness sake, but whether it be local, state or federal.
That's where I draw the line in terms of watching question time or debate.
Yeah. We've just got to hold our politicians and elected members, accountable and impress upon them that we expect that little bit more. You can still have robust debate without being personal. You can still have robust debate and be humorous and have a bit of fun. And quite frankly, that's what we love to see. But let's keep it respectful.
Mm. Well, on that note, we might wrap up for today. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. As you mentioned at the outset, President Trump, as of recording, has announced a ceasefire or a truce. I don't know whether all sides of that conflict are seeing the same outcome, but we'll wait and see. We'll continue to monitor that and no doubt have more to say on successive weeks of state parliament in Western Australia, and we'll move towards the recommencement of federal parliament, which feels like it's been a long time coming, following the election and obviously some significant changes in Australia's position in both the global economy and within our region.
Indeed.
Yeah, thanks,
Indeed.
Libby.
Thanks, Pat.
Ta.